My name is Emily, and today I'm going to tell you a story that many find hard to believe. It's a story that changed my life forever, and perhaps it might change yours too. It all began when I was 8 years old. I lived with my parents in an old house surrounded by a dense forest. It was a peaceful place, but I always felt there was something strange about those trees. There was a constant feeling of being watched, something I couldn't comprehend at the time. Then, one night, I woke up to a strange sound coming from the forest. It was as if someone was whispering my name. Curious, but also scared, I got out of bed and walked to the window. The full moon illuminated the forest, revealing shadows that moved in a disturbing way. Against my better judgment, I felt compelled to follow that call. I quietly left the house, careful not to wake my parents. I walked through the forest, guided by whispers that seemed to come from all directions. The trees seemed to close in around me, forming a narrow, dark path. After walking for what felt like an eternity, I arrived at a clearing. In the center, there was a circle of ancient stones, covered in symbols that glowed with a sinister hue under the moonlight. I was drawn by an invisible force to the center of the circle. That's when the shadows started moving faster, as if gaining form. Hooded figures emerged from the darkness, murmuring words in a language I didn't understand. Fear took over, and I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. The figures formed a circle around me, and in the center emerged a crude altar made of bones and stones. The leader of the group, a tall figure with an overwhelming presence, raised an ancient book and began reciting something that made the air around us vibrate. The missing children, whom I recognized from the posters around town, were there, their eyes glazed and lifeless. It was then that I understood. This wasn't just an abduction, it was a ritual. The children were the keys to opening a portal between worlds, a portal that would bring darkness to our world. And I was the next piece of the puzzle. The leader began to recite a more intense incantation, and I felt my mind slipping away, being sucked into that void. But suddenly, a warm, intense light enveloped my body. The invisible force that held me dissipated, and I was able to run. I ran with all my might, feeling the shadows trying to reach me. The forest seemed like a maze, but something, perhaps a primal instinct, guided me back home. The following days were a blur. I was in shock, unable to speak about what had happened. My parents were desperate, and the police didn't know what to do. The other children were found wandering the forest, also in a state of shock, but all were returned to their families. As the years went by, I tried to bury those memories, but the dreams wouldn't let me forget. Those symbols, those hooded figures, and the whispers that still echoed in my mind. Finally, I found the courage to investigate on my own. I discovered an ancient manuscript that spoke of old rituals performed to open portals between worlds. The symbols I saw that night were described there in detail. The guardians of the threshold, as they called themselves, believed that the blood of innocence was necessary to maintain the balance between worlds. It was a terrible revelation, but also a relief to know I wasn't crazy. With this new understanding, I returned to the forest, now an adult. The symbols on the trees were faded, but still visible. The circle of stones was still there, a silent monument to the horror I lived through. I realized it wasn't over. The peace that returned to Hollow Creek was temporary. The evil still lurked in the shadows, waiting for another opportunity to emerge. And I was determined to prevent it from happening again. My story is a warning. Evil can be closer than we imagine, hidden in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. If you ever feel like you're being watched or hear whispers in the night, remember me and be prepared. The horror I lived through can happen again, and it's our responsibility to keep the darkness at bay.